Hello, everyone. Welcome to HIGH Strangeness, a podcast where we talk about the big existential questions that most people ignore for their own sanity, but we value for their philosophical implications and because they are just so fucking fun to talk about. I am your host, Em, and I am happy to be talking to you today. When I was a kid, I had a tendency to struggle with the bigger meaning behind almost everything. I displayed a lot of anxious traits, like hoarding some trash from toys I really liked or keeping wrappers from candy that someone I loved gave me. But I was also raised religious, which, in my opinion, it's not a bad thing or in itself out of context does any damage to raising a child, but it made me think a lot deeper about things than a lot of other kids my age, being around, probably 5 or 6 at the time, would have normally done. I specifically remember my first ever panic attack. I was in the car with my parents driving home from somewhere and it was close to my bedtime and very dark outside. I was old enough to not have to sit in a car seat, and I was also old enough to hate car rides. They felt like mandatory boredom chambers, and I hated being alone with my thoughts. I don't recall much before the triggering thoughts and panic, but I know I was thinking about heaven, and I thought to myself, if people die and leave their bodies on Earth, are we going to have eyes in heaven? And it scared the shit out of me because I was thinking that I want to be able to see my family when I get to heaven so we can meet up and hang out for all of time, right? So I asked my mom if people had eyes in heaven. She said no, and I immediately just broke psychologically. At the time, I would have said it was because we wouldn't be able to see after we die, that's a bummer. But in retrospect, I recognize it now as more of the first experience that I ever had on my own, to coming to terms with understanding the temporary clause of my existence, and that it's very frustrating to be an animal in the mystery school type terms, which is, a beast who physically lives once, and they die, and then the soul leaves the body, and the body turns into a disgusting sensory overload for other animals who are still alive. It scared the shit out of me. And from that point on, I remember overthinking absolutely everything. I couldn't watch cartoons with zombies or aliens because it would send me into thought spirals that would make me lose sleep for literally months. It took me a very long time to be able to grow emotionally and mentally to be able to handle those types of topics. I slowly began to love horror movies, but I was terrified of aliens. I was less freaked out when my pets or family members passed away, and embarrassingly enough, in my early 20s, I was able to get over my fear of aliens. Existential philosophy is something I think everyone can benefit from because it forces a person to understand ideas and tension like meaning and nothingness, and in my opinion, it humbles someone to look at all of existence from a third point of view. So please join me today while we discuss the Fermi paradox, and more importantly, where is everyone? Even though the Fermi paradox is named for physicist Enrico Fermi, one of the first speculations on the question at hand was written in 1933 by a Soviet aerospace engineer named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. UFO enthusiasts may recognize the zoo hypothesis, for which he is credited for. In layman's terms, the zoo hypothesis is as it sounds. Life outside of Earth knows we are here, and they're watching, but they don't wish to communicate with us, either by choice or because they don't have the ability to. Some people may ask, but what about the UFO footage confirmed by the Navy? Those aircrafts were incredibly smooth and quick. How could whatever is out there not have the ability to communicate with us? Which is a good segue to introduce the Fermi paradox itself. In 1950s New Mexico, at Los Alamos National Laboratory, a group of 4 physicists were discussing advances in science and UFOs. While 3 men chatted away, Enrico Fermi sat and listened stoically until the UFO talk started, to which he shouted, "Then where is everybody?" The men laughed it off at the time, but the question loomed on everyone's minds months and years after the conversation. So what is the Fermi paradox in a more philosophical or thought experiment-esque type sense, or in those terms? The Fermi paradox has 2 parts. The first being that human science and math has shown us that intelligent life is likely to be common throughout the universe. The second part is that we have no solid proof of any other form of intelligent life in our universe, let alone galaxy. Throughout the years, there have been many proposals to solve the Fermi paradox. However, none have been satisfactory to get people to stop asking the question. So let's talk about what some people believe could be the possible answer to the Fermi paradox, and we'll do this in groups. So this will be group 1, and the common theme among all these answers is that intelligent life is special and not as common as we expect. This group of answers is one that I think is probably the least credible because it reminds me of people being absolutely certain that Earth was the center of the universe. These explanations sometimes seem to think too highly of humans and our levels of intelligence, in my humble opinion. In 1975, Michael Hart published an article in the Quarterly Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society expanding on the Fermi paradox and proposing what is now called rare Earth hypothesis. Life developing as it has on Earth is abnormal and we are special. However, as you can probably tell from my little intro, I do not like these types of answers, as they assume life and consciousness is basically lenient on biological complexity. If you have ever read 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke, you know that sometimes life is not considered biological. When we think of aliens like the little gray men, we are literally projecting human traits onto entities that are not human. In college, I was able to take a course entirely on science fiction, and my professor was one of the most intelligent readers I have ever met in person. He was able to think about otherworldly things in a way that really frustrated me at the time because it felt like thinking in a way that is impossible for us to comprehend, until I figured out for myself that thinking that way probably is. In my humble opinion, I doubt that if we ran into EBEs, or extraterrestrial biological entities, I don't think that they would be that smart or be able to communicate with humans. They would probably be more like bugs or fish. My tinfoil-covered brain sees intelligence closer to technology, electricity, physics, things we aren't capable of, but we'll save the fringe convos for the smoking bar. This idea that we're so special and we have it so good is also a common argument to prove the existence of God, often called the argument from fine-tuning. The argument basically says that this universe is so perfectly designed for humans to live in, it has to be the responsibility of a greater power. This is also a convenient transition into the next answer for the Fermi hypothesis, which is that life, biological, is out there, but it's not intelligent. This is something I find to be more plausible. Charles Lineweaver, a professor of physics at Australian National University, commented on the idea that he thought just because something seems to be capable of intelligence does not mean it will develop it, famously saying that dolphins have had about 20 million years to build a radio telescope and have not done so. The third and final answer in this group is also a plausible explanation seeing what happened to the dinosaurs on Earth. This answer argues that extinction events are pretty common, and life, intelligent or not, is usually temporary because space is a dangerous place. Group 2, the nature of intelligent life throughout the universe. This series of answers speculates the complexity of intelligence and how things can go poorly between intelligent civilizations, or intelligence takes a lot more work than we assume. These answers are more fun for me because the philosophical reflections on humans and human nature are almost crystal clear. So, one of the first explanations is that intelligent life does not develop technology at the same relative speed. This answer suggests that we may be ahead of the game when it comes to technology. In science fiction as well as theoretical physics, technological capability is a huge determinant when it comes to the intelligence of a civilization. For example, let's review Kardashev's scale. Another idea proposed by a Soviet scientist, Nikolai Kardashev made a hypothetical scale for the level of technology, intelligence, and energy use for civilizations. It has been expanded upon, but for this episode we will stick to the original type, which is they have type 1, type 2, and type 3 civilizations. And in these terms, Earth, by the way, would rank as a type 0. A Type 1 civilization would be able to harness all of the energy that reaches their planet from the nearest star. A Type 2 civilization would be able to harness and control the entire radiation output of a star, as opposed to type 1, where it can only harness the energy that reaches it from the star. A type 2 can literally like harness the sun. And then a type 3 civilization would be able to harness all of the energy present within its own galaxy. And that's a lot of fucking power. But with intelligence comes disagreement. Another suggestion, popularly held by Carl Sagan himself, says that intelligent life is destined to eventually wipe itself out, whether it be weapons of mass destruction, environmental destruction, or a plateau of intelligence that will not keep civilians fit for survival. Stephen Hawking believed that our level of intellect and communication skills are not suitable to keep our civilizations alive for millions of years, let alone communicate with an alien civilization peacefully. He thought that those answers could be solved with artificial intelligence. But speaking of disagreement, the next argument is that alien life could be just as we imagine it in the movies. Bloodthirsty warmongers who want to eat us, take our land, probe us, the typical alien stuff. This answer suggests that intelligence brings things like greed and evil, but then again, this answer is projecting a lot of human traits on otherworldly things. How do we know that those types of emotions aren't just human characteristics? Another explanation is that alien technology is actually much faster than ours, and the signals that aliens would broadcast are probably undetectable to our primitive Earth technology, or that they value their privacy and purposefully innovate technology to make sure that signal leakage is minimal. Then the last explanation for this group is actually my favorite and what I believe to be the most probable explanation for where the fuck is everybody. That is that alien life may be too alien for us to comprehend. This has been something I have thought about since I was very, very young. And when I initially started researching the Rational Wiki every waking second of the day, a quote from the article covering this argument stuck out to me, saying, "Perhaps human mathematics is parochial to Earth and not shared by other life." This sentence perfectly explains why I was so fucking frustrated with math in middle school. My teachers would say things like, "I like math because it's the only subject where the answers are absolutely correct if they're correct, and if they're wrong, they're absolutely wrong." And I would try to raise my hand and ask questions very poorly worded, like, "To who? How do we know this? How do we know it works every time? Is there anyone to confirm?" But the teachers would always just tell me I think way too hard. That's why I'm failing, because I keep thinking about the reasoning behind it and I don't just do it. Thought experiments like this really remind me of the professor I was speaking about earlier. I remember a specific lecture. We were talking about War of the Worlds and how the author tried to describe aliens, and my professor said something along the lines of, the characters in the novel are saying aliens have, a huge mouth. But how do we know that's their mouth? How do we know aliens would even need a mouth? And several spiraling questions that really made you think about how complex life would form, biological or not, and how physically different beings probably are that are not native to Earth. Aliens could be sending us messages, but we might not think anything of it because it's too advanced for us to ever consider it a message. You know the deal. Group 3 pertains to society and intelligent life. These explanations take the assumption that societies form as they do on Earth, where beings will enter into a social contract to function together for a greater good and better security. And the first answer that this group of answers tries to pose is that colonization is not really a wide-ranging passion for intelligent life. To colonize outside of what they are familiar with might not be appealing. A second explanation is that alien life would only want to settle one part of the galaxy. In 2019, Adam Frank, an American astrophysicist, ran several simulations to see how intelligent life could colonize the Milky Way galaxy, but found that a majority of the simulations ended with only parts of the Milky Way becoming permanently settled. A third explanation is that life may not be living in the reality of the universe we're experiencing. I know that sentence doesn't sound like it makes any sense, but philosophers like David Chalmers have explored this idea heavily, that biological entities or life where environments are very poor might choose to partake in mind uploading, or living their life entirely in virtual reality. This might seem like a stretch or a more fringe type answer, but philosopher and professor David J. Chalmers has a lot to say about the idea and its validity in his book Reality Plus: Virtual Worlds and the Problems of Philosophy. In chapter 15, titled Can There Be Consciousness in a Digital World?, Dr. Chalmers reminisces on the old Star Trek with Captain Picard, specifically the episode The Measure of a Man, where the plot revolves around the question as to whether Data, an android, is intelligent. While this might seem a little bit off topic, it comes back to the idea of how we project human traits onto extraterrestrials, like EBEs. Chalmers asks, can a digital system be conscious? Which I think puts more nuance on the search for intelligent life. Because what if we find a civilization that is entirely just uploaded via mind uploading? What if we learn that most civilizations outside of Earth choose to live their life in full encompassing simulations or reality, a virtual reality that is? Chalmers specifically defines mind uploading as the attempt to transfer our minds from a biological brain to a digital computer. We will talk about virtual reality and what it means to be conscious in another episode. Conscious. I am conscious. If you ever just read so long, words don't mean anything anymore. Conscious. I am conscious. Fuck. But anyways, Chalmers loops back to his Star Trek reference later in the chapter, noting that the questions Picard raised about Data and his capacity for consciousness have philosophical weight to the idea of mind uploading. He restates them to fit his context, proposing 1. Will the upload behave like me? 2. Will the upload have consciousness? 3. Will the upload authentically be me? This leads to even more questions about things like artificial intelligence and how close we are to getting to understanding more about the capabilities of technology. There's so many clickbait articles, like from a few months ago, that guy from Google who was a software engineer tried to say an AI was sentient. Fuck no, that guy just wanted a book deal. And backed up by Chalmers, who has an academic history in mathematics, he confirms that there is no digital system we know of that is close to having any sort of general intelligence. Group 4 of the explanations for the Fermi paradox focuses on the fact that there is not an infinite supply of needed objects for space travel, space communication, at arm's reach. A lack of resources could be an explanation, or another is the fact that alien civilizations may have found it easier to send unmanned aircrafts, like drones or probes, as physical exploration. Is that what I said? Physical exploration could be deemed to be too dangerous. The 5th group of answers boils down basically to we are not smart enough to be able to communicate with the aliens. I think some of the explanations is that we are not able to understand their radio signals because their technology is moving a lot faster than ours is, and the signals they would put out from a certain device, they would eventually outgrow that technology faster than we can keep up. So we're not getting any messages. We can't understand the messages coming to us, you know. And then group 6, which is that they are watching. Fuck yeah. This group is very entertaining and a basis for a lot of science fiction movies where we figure out that we're not alone. The zoo hypothesis is relevant to almost every answer in this group of questions. One argument being that everyone is listening to our transmissions, but no one wants to or can reply. Another is that alien civilizations have discovered other intelligent life to be dangerous and choose not to communicate with us. And then with that, some argue that the Earth is avoided on purpose, chosen to leave uncontacted by whatever culture is beyond our reach, excluding us from their club. But the final popular argument for that group is the idea that we are in an experiment. Dr. Chalmers has a lot of material on this, but what was a specific reminder of this idea was an episode of The X-Files where Scully suggested that life on Earth has been speculated to be an experiment conducted by outside intelligence to run human lives until they find, like, the perfect set of genes for, like, a biological being. These answers assume that we're being fucked with, kind of. We're being used for experimental purposes. Another answer that kind of like says fuck you to the Fermi question is that they are already here. If you're a horror fan, I'm hoping that you've seen John Carpenter's absolute banger of a film, They Live, where a group of conspirators learn that the upper class of humans on Earth are actually aliens that broadcast signals from television and radio towers on Earth to force an illusion on human eyes to see them just as every other normal people, when reality, like, when you can see them as they actually are, they're these grotesque blue and, like, red humanoid muscly things. This answer to the Fermi paradox, if you couldn't already tell, is a pretty common dog whistle for a ton of racism, historical racism throughout the years. But it also has the potential for a ton of ancient theology and mythology enthusiasts. So here we go back to the idea of EBEs, extraterrestrial biological entities, just in case you forgot. If you're familiar with crank magnetism at all, you've probably heard the term the Anunnaki, which is what some people believe to be an alien reptilian race that has lived on Earth for a very long time, seen in art like Mayan carvings and Persian paintings. These would be considered EBEs, because if they live on Earth unnoticed, we can assume that they have some sort of biological process that allows them to live in the conditions us carbon-based bipeds would. The idea of aliens is very popular for, amateur Reddit theologians. I often see posts where people are like, hey guys, what if Jesus was an alien? Like, buddy, you are very, very late to that idea. If you want to be a real stickler about it, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are extraterrestrials. They didn't originate on Earth, but to be a hippie about it, there are several texts that suggest our beloved Bible characters could be from outer space. It's generally common knowledge for the casual Christian population to be aware of the books of the Bible that they believe, but some people do not know that that is not all of the books of the Bible. Only some are published in certain versions depending on what different sect of Christianity it caters to. Most of my expertise in those writings are Gnostic texts, including the Gospel of Judas, which suggests that Judas had like an inside knowledge on why Christ was here. A conversation recorded between Judas Iscariot and Jesus includes a conversation where Judas is like, hey, I know you. You are from the realm of Barbello, here to warn us about the demiurge. And in Gnostic religion, that is what other Christians would consider to be God or Yahweh, Jesus' father, who rules our earth. But in the Gospel of Judas and in Gnostic teachings, the idea is that God, or the demiurge, only rules this earth and not the entire reality, and he is evil and treats us bad. Mormonism also finds some roots in the idea that Jesus was from outer space. Some Mormon belief finds that Jesus was the king of this planet, and Mormons have the potential to ascend like Jesus to be the king of a different planet in this universe, but only if you're a white man. But what I find most interesting and thought-consuming about the idea of God being an alien is, what if we discover that God is an alien, but he's not an EBE? He, as if it has a gender. What if God is some form of electricity, or we're just characters in a simulation? If we're in a simulation, is the simulator an EBE or a different form of intelligence? If we found out that God was something as simple as the Higgs boson particle and we already found it and it's done, or something as complex as a form of mechanical intelligence, would we still value the fables that we were told about a humanized God made in our image? In his book God, A Human History by Reza Aslan, he argues that the religions practiced by Greek and Romans, worshipping the gods like Mercury and Zeus, were eventually moved to the status of myth because the fables about the gods became way too human and not mystic or pious enough for what is needed for a person to want to worship. The current deities that the majority of modern worshippers on Earth follow have a lot more nuance, hence their survival for thousands of years. Thank you for joining me for this episode of High Strangeness. Next Wednesday, I hope you rejoin me so we can discuss world religions and a brief synopsis of all of their beliefs and the culture around their beliefs. Thank you so much. See you soon. I surf the internet, hope I'm not redundant, so count